Good afternoon. Thank you so much for joining us today. I'm really excited to be doing the Q&As again. And again, like always, I'm doing them selfishly. This is my opportunity to learn things. So today we have Dr. Parikh with us. He is the practice president for Comprehensive Cancer Centers, which we're going to probably find out what that means in a moment. But he's also a practicing oncologist. And I was actually having a conversation with Dr. Parikh maybe a month or two ago, and we brought up the idea of discussing clinical trials. And to be perfectly honest, I've realized that I know so little about clinical trials that I thought it would be a good idea to just like walk down that path with you guys. And then I had a conversation with Lisa about the fact that you guys are doing clinical trials here in Nevada, so people don't have to leave the state for it, which I thought was kind of a significant thing we needed to talk about. So, number one, thank you so much for joining me today and enlighten me about the concept of clinical trials, Dr. Parikh.
You're welcome. Thank you for having me. Thank you for having me. So,
I'm glad I was able to talk you into coming back, right?
That's the easy part. So
I know sometimes I have that oh no, I'm not coming back effect on people. So I really appreciate you. Are you willing to join us again?
Of course.
I'm going to ask a dumb question, and I realize this is probably a dumb question, but let's just start with the basics. What does the term clinical trial mean?
So clinical trial in layman's terms essentially means that you're part of a study using new medicines that may be approved or about to get approved, or brand new to the market, saying we don't know what these medicines do, but in the lab it looks like there's some activity against cancer cells, so they want to test it in human subjects, obviously. So sometimes we combine it with other standard chemotherapy regimens or other drugs that we have. Sometimes they're independent, where you only get the study drug by itself because there's enough data to say that this drug does have some activity. We just want to see if it's safe to use. And that's how patients get involved in these trials. So essentially a clinical trial or a clinical study is a simple way of thinking that it's a new treatment that we're looking to see the safety of and to see if it works equally to what we have standard of care treatment for, or is it better than standard of care, hopefully not inferior to standard of care.
And these are, this is maybe not the right word, but they're timed studies in the sense of it's 1 month long, it's 8 months long, it's 5 days long. I mean, are they typically longer?
So they're usually longer because they're treatment studies. We give the medicine. Sometimes they're what we call randomized to one regimen versus another regimen. And sometimes they can go on for years. I have a patient on a clinical study that's now going on for 4.5 years, and he's still on the study drug because nobody's wanting to take him off, including me, because he's still responding to it. So
right. Wow. So that's a possibility?
Yes, that is a possibility. Sometimes sponsors allow us to keep patients on their drugs, even if the trial closes to accrual, that because the drugs are safe and it's working. It's almost unethical to take a patient off something that's working, keeping them alive, if you think about it. So
right.
So yes, that is a certain possibility. But usually trials last, months to years. Even if the trial stops, we still have to get the data and see how these patients are doing a year down the road, 2 years down the road. So the data collection continues for these patients, and they're continuing to be part of that trial process for years and years sometimes.
Oh, interesting. So if they start a trial through Comprehensive Cancer Center, like something that you guys have set up, and they move, are they still allowed to stay in the trial, and can they come back and be part of the study even though they don't live in the state anymore?
So sometimes that happens. If the trial is available to where they're moving to, we can ask the trial sponsor to shift the trial to that location. Usually if the trial is not available and if they're on active treatment, they'll have to come off study because the trials are very heavily FDA regulated, meaning, there's strict regulations that we have to follow. Each one of our sites has certification rules that we have to go through, training that we have to go through to be part of these trials. And they're
Mm-hmm.
not specific comprehensive cancer trials. We do trials that are part of what a national network called US Oncology. We
Mm-hmm.
also do trials through our UCLA network where they give us some of their trials so the patients don't have to go to UCLA.
Mm-hmm.
And we have other trials that we do through what we call the Nevada Research Foundation Network, which
Mm-hmm.
are big organizations, that have trials that we're part of and we can access.
So let's say I've been diagnosed, there's a patient been diagnosed with cancer and they're interested in pursuing a clinical trial. Do they have to get approval from their doctor first to be in?
Yes.
Okay. So
So
they
how that
call their
works is,
doctor.
let's say you're a patient who comes to me as with a new cancer diagnosis, and I say, oh, hey, we may have a clinical trial for you. The doctor would have to present that trial.
Mm-hmm.
Now, the doctor doesn't know if you're eligible or not. So there's a strict criteria for each trial. Each trial has different eligibility criteria. We would fill out all the paperwork. Sometimes it needs a biopsy or tissue to be sent off to the trial monitors, wherever they're located. Sometimes they're international, sometimes they're in the United States. And then the trial sponsors would come back to us and say, yes, patient is eligible. This is what you need to do to get her onto trial. If the patient is not eligible, then we talk about other treatment options, obviously.
Mm.
So just
So
because a trial is out there doesn't mean you're 100% going to be eligible for it. So.
eligible. Do you find that there are typically more clinical trials coming out now, or are there less clinical trials?
So cancer medicine continues to boom. There's a lot of trials out there.
Mm-hmm.
There's more trials coming out. The challenge is implementing those trials, because to
Right.
do a trial takes a whole team of people. I mean, just at Comprehensive, we have 40 different employees just working on research only, trying to help control all of these trials, go through all the paperwork that's needed. Because it's not just paperwork locally, it's paperwork we have to submit to the national sponsor, to the FDA,
Mm-hmm.
etc. And each one of those staff members goes through a lot of training. Sorry about that, but
Yeah. Well,
but
as
each
long
one.
as you didn't get hurt, that's the only thing that
Oh,
matters.
we're good. So yeah,
Yep.
so yeah, just. Yeah, so.
It just,
But
it
yeah, so as
happens
I
all
was
the
saying,
time, right?
so it takes an army to run research trials.
Yeah.
We've built that army. We will continue to build that army. We continue to look to expand our research programs, because the goal is to try and help as many patients as possible.
Right.
And we have trials available at each one of our treating locations.
Mm-hmm. So I'm going to ask, this might be a crazy question, and it may sound silly to you, but this is how I ask questions.
No silly questions.
I'm asking you personally. I'm asking you
Okay.
personally as an oncologist.
Yep.
Do you think that clinical trials are an asset
Yeah.
a lot, or just like it's okay and we do them because you never know? Or do you think that really these are all very effective?
No, so my personal bias and CCCN's philosophy is clinical trials are a huge part of what we do. They're a huge asset to our patients, because it's not just trials after they failed standard of care. They're actually helping us revolutionize new drugs. So over its Comprehensive Cancer Center's history, our organization's history, we've brought over 100 drugs to market with these trials. We've helped
Wow.
100 new cancer drugs get approved. So, some trials are based on after failure of what we normally have. Other trials are based on, hey, let's combine some of these new agents with what we have, and is it better for our patients? So it's defined how we do cancer care and how we change cancer care.
Mm-hmm.
And having these trials is a huge part of that. It's a huge asset. It's a win for our patients. Not only do you get to get monitored locally by us and our team, a national team also follows you for these trials, because you have to fill out all the paperwork and make sure that we're doing everything correctly. So.
Right. And again, this might be a silly question, but there's no clinical trial that's for every cancer, right? These are broken out by types of cancer, correct?
Yeah.
Okay.
And there's no one trial that says all cancers are included. It's impossible to do that. So.
Okay.
But some of our phase 1 trials have multiple cancers that may have a targeted receptor on the cancer cell that they may be eligible to. So it may be all solid tumors, for example, may be eligible. But we have to send that pathology off to be tested to see if they're eligible. It's one of the eligibility criteria, as we call it. But there's no one trial that says, yes, it'll work in all cancers. It's just too many mechanisms of action to do that.
Right. Well, I just learned recently, I knew there was multiple types of breast cancer, but I didn't realize there was about 400 different breast cancers, which seems like a lot to me. And maybe I learned that from a comprehensive cancer center doctor, as a matter of fact. Right. So that's why I was wondering, even in the trials, is that one of the reasons why you may not be eligible for that specific trial? Because cancer cells are so different, even amongst the same general type of cancer?
Yeah, exactly. So that's one of the criteria that we look at, certainly, is when we do these trials and the eligibility, we have to make sure that the trials are designed to include the most amount of people. So they include the standard, most common types of cancers. So sometimes you may have a 18th variant of a breast cancer that there's no trial for just because there's not enough patients to accrue.
Right.
And the trial would take 10 years to get patients, right? So,
yeah. So out of that, so with that same thought process in mind, I guess what I want to get to what I'm really thinking, which is, are you guys, as an organization that is focusing on clinical trials to find cures, can you extrapolate out like 3 years down the road and say, or I don't know this puzzle, hey, we want to be sure that we're doing 5 breast cancer trials, and we want to have 7 colon cancer trials going. Do you plan that out?
So it's impossible to plan out, number one.
Okay.
Because the drugs are just variable and coming from companies and organizations saying, hey, we want to try this combination or that combination.
Okay.
Every month we have a research executive committee that meets, that goes over multiple different protocols. We look at our protocol list and say, hey, we're missing this trial. Maybe we should add this because we don't have a trial for this cancer, for example. And I'll give you a little example. If you see it's little, I don't know if you can see that or not, but if you can see it, it's a little graph that we have. It's multiple pages. And it essentially goes through what cancer types we have, what trials we have available, and the general eligibility, so the doctor knows, saying, hey, maybe this trial is for this patient, for example. So.
Okay, now if this is an illegal question, I apologize, but let's say again, there's a patient that's diagnosed with cancer and their doctor is wonderful, lovely doctor, but just not in the know, which I imagine happens a lot, right? Because your medicine changes almost like on an hourly basis in some instances.
It does, yeah.
Does it make sense for that patient who is taking their health very seriously to make a phone call and say, hey, I want to talk to you about possibilities for me?
Yeah, exactly. I think patients should be the biggest advocates for themselves, or their family members should be the biggest advocates for themselves, because it is impossible to keep up with all of this. And the easiest thing to do, I always say, hey, ask your doctor first. If your doctor's, inviting to open questions, they'll look up the trial for you and say, yes, this is a good idea, or this is a bad idea. But I think without having that knowledge, it's impossible to know. So I always tell patients, if you ever find something on the internet you want me to look up that I don't know about, or if you have any questions, please let me know. I'll be happy to research it for you, and I'll give you my honest opinion. Sometimes they don't like the opinion, but it is an honest opinion. So,
once you're diagnosed with cancer, I imagine I've been blessed that I haven't. I can't imagine any preceding conversations are easy unless they're precipitated with the words, you're cured, right? Other than that, it's a difficult conversation no matter what. So, but to know your options, to know there might be something out there that will help you, it's good to at least investigate that, correct?
100%, and I fully advocate that every patient should have the full depth of knowledge that every other patient should have. So there shouldn't be any secret between doctor and patient, I think, and that's taking care of the patient philosophy. So
right. So now, when it applies to clinical trials, so there's a and I could be wrong about this, but if I'm not mistaken, in a clinical trial, does everybody get the drug? it's not a blind placebo scenario, is it? Or are they?
So there are some trials that have what we call standard of care or
Okay.
standard of care plus drug versus placebo, because we don't know if that drug is better than the placebo.
Okay.
So there are some, and they're randomized and they're blinded even to us because
Mm-hmm.
we don't want to be affected on how
No.
we
Right.
influence the data. So they're blinded only to the sponsor where the drug comes from, for example. And those are certainly possibilities, but it depends on what phase of treatment you're in as well. So some of our phase 1, 2 trials are you 100% get the drug. There's no ifs, ands, or buts, right? So,
Mm-hmm.
but that is it just depends on which trial is out there. We would never give a placebo only trial to a patient. It's
Right.
unethical to do that. And we would always make sure the patient understands what they're consenting to.
Yeah.
There's a whole process that we go through, just the consent part, to make sure they understand exactly what they're consenting to. So they understand that if it is a placebo trial, they'll still get standard of care with it. They may or may not get the study drug with it. So,
Right. So in a clinical trial, I know you refer to phase 1, phase 2. Typically, how many phases are there?
so there's 4 phases usually.
4.
Yeah, phase 1 is brand new drug coming to market. And at comprehensive, we've had patient 001 in the entire world on some of our phase 1 trials, meaning that you're the first patient in the entire world to actually get these drugs. And
Wow.
that's the beauty of phase 1 sometimes. Phase 2 is a little bit more advanced. They passed that phase 1 study, still looking at the safety of the drug. Phase 3 and 4 are usually comparison trials to standard of care, saying, is it better than what we normally have? Is it worth coming to the market, et cetera? Sometimes drugs get fast-tracked, as we call it, by the FDA based on
Mm-hmm.
phase 2/early phase 3 data, because the response rates are so high, the FDA just says, okay, we're going to allow this drug to come to market
Mm-hmm.
without having the full set of data. So
Now, is it good practice for if one organization administers the phase 1 trial that they definitely should be doing the phase 2, 3, and 4 trial, or do you move those?
So it's all part of the research process, right?
Okay.
So there's very few people that do only phase 1 trials, just because those patients are usually limited to 20 or 30 in the entire country, you know. So you have to have the phase 2 and the phase 3 program with it. It's a whole research team process.
Oh, that's great,
To go
actually.
through the
Okay.
process, yeah.
Wow. Because I was like, especially if it's working for that one patient. I know you said you
Yeah.
can petition to stay in or continue that
Yeah.
treatment, but I was a research director for radio. It is absolutely not the same thing, but I
Right.
do like the idea of consistent data.
Yes,
I'm a big
exactly.
fan of consistently acquired data. So, gosh, I just love these because I learn so much. And sometimes I think I'm asking really ridiculous questions, but typically there's method to my madness in terms of getting me from point A to point B. And I kind of feel our constituents do that too. I do believe that so few people advocate for themselves for their own health. We've never really been taught that, I don't think. So
Yeah, it's a different world out there, and with the invent of internet, or Dr. Google, as I call it sometimes, there's a lot of information out there, and you have to be careful of what you read also,
yeah.
and as you know, the minute you find out you have the big C word, the cancer word, all your 20 friends automatically are doctors all of a sudden,
Yeah.
and say, hey, try this, or try this, or I heard this,
Yeah.
or I heard that. So it's very important you get accurate data. And use your doctor's offices to get that data. The doctors should be responsive in answering these questions. And they should be available to research stuff for you if they don't know themselves. There shouldn't be shyness about that, certainly. But that is all part of the new patient care relationship, right? And it's all about taking care of the patient. That's the most important thing. And taking care of that patient means you give them all the options that are available, certainly. So.
Right. So in terms of Comprehensive Cancer Center, because I'm talking to you, so we're going to talk about you guys specifically for a moment. I've decided I got to figure out if I'm eligible for a trial, and I want to do it through you guys. So I contact you. You guys, I'm setting up a doctor's appointment. I'm going through a whole regimen of tests even though my doctor may have already performed those tests?
Yeah. So
Typically?
sometimes
Okay.
that does happen because to be eligible for some of these trials, you need a test within what they call a window.
Oh, yeah.
So you have to do the test within 6 weeks of the trial starting, or 8 weeks of the trial starting, or 4 weeks of the trial starting. So
Okay.
sometimes those tests do that repeated,
Mhm.
but you would meet with a comprehensive doctor first, and then that doctor would say, yes, I think you're eligible. Let's start the process. The first thing you do is obviously sign that consent form, because without the consent form, we don't even order a test for the trial.
Right.
So, but yeah, sometimes you will feel like, oh, I just had this scan 5 weeks ago, but the trial wants it within 4 weeks. So, we start that process over.
Got it. So, and again, I just want to reiterate for our constituents and the people that are listening that clinical trials really are a good choice if you find yourself in a situation where maybe it's a different type of cancer, or have clinical trials, do they actually, I realize we've talked about it, focuses on, the common cancers, which makes sense to me. It
Sure.
makes more sense to do that because there's not enough patients to do the other. Um, but I worry about, cancers that people are so used to treating, right? Like breast cancer has been around a while. We've been focusing on breast cancer treatments, and
Sure.
a lot of them are very similar. Are there enough new trials coming out for breast cancer?
There actually are.
Oh,
And
great.
because the combination of these targeted drugs and therapies are endless right now. So immunotherapy, for example, came out for breast cancer a couple of years ago. We were part of that trial to bring that drug onto market,
Mm-hmm.
and that trial was ongoing. But a lot of these targeted therapies are coming out through phase 1 and 2. If we don't have that trial here, we may have the phase 3 trial saying, hey, you have that target, we have a drug that may work, you failed standard of care, are you interested? And
Mm-hmm.
that's the beauty, even with common cancers that we're looking at. Common cancers are the easiest trials to recruit to because there's tons of patients, obviously.
Mm-hmm.
So those trials are abundant. There's a lot of them out there. Some of those trials means you have to have failed 1, 2, or 3 lines of therapy to be eligible. Some of those trials are upfront trials where we say, hey, we have what we call standard of care chemo to help prevent the cancer from coming back. But
Mm-hmm.
we have this new drug that if we add it, we think that your recurrence rate is much lower later. So it's looking at that, for example, in the
Mm-hmm.
trial. So there are multiple different trial options out there. So
How do you guys keep track of that? I
yeah,
need
so
that.
so we have our research team, as we say. We it's 40 people strong right now at growing. We have this little pamphlet that we get every 2 weeks from our research team with all the trials that are listed.
Oh,
The
okay.
doctors, each one of the doctors who signs up to be part of the trial, who wants to enroll patients, has to go through training to be part of that trial. So we do a training through either WebEx or PowerPoints or emails or one-on-one to make sure that the doctor understands what the trial is and what the drug is, so that there's no questions, in terms of side effects, et cetera, what to look out for and things like that.
Mm-hmm.
So it is a process, I can tell you. And it is a lot
Wow.
to keep up with, but we all try our best. So, and
Yeah.
some of us know all 40, 140 trials. Some of us know, 100 trials,
Yeah.
but,
But the great thing about
but
being in a practice is you can talk to your fellow oncologists and
yeah,
be a
exactly.
team,
So,
really, right?
yeah, exactly. And for example, like I have patients who I've sent to my Twain location, our Central Valley location, because I don't have that trial open at our center here. I pick up the phone, I call my colleague, say, hey, I know you have this trial, I have this patient for you, will you see him? Sure, send them down. Hey, they're eligible. They're still here 1, 2, 3 years later on that trial, for example. So,
Mm-hmm.
and that's happened a few times. So that we're not shy about sharing patients and trials between offices, certainly. So, and
Right.
that is the beauty of being part of the practice. So.
That is actually, and I'm like you're getting even greater wealth of knowledge when you think about it. Instead
Yeah.
of, not that you aren't brilliant, that is not what I'm saying.
That's
You are
fine.
brilliant, but it's also great to have other people in your corner that
Yeah,
can.
it 100%. And like I said, for example, I'm not a phase 1 guy, right? But I have 3 people in my office or in my group that does phase 1 only. So I
Right.
easily pick up the phone and say, hey, I have a patient for you. Will you see him? because that requires a lot of additional training because you're then one of the first patients in the world sometimes to get these drugs. So, but then we have that ability to do that at Comprehensive. And that's the beauty again of being part of the practice, being part of a team. And we have a whole research team that's dedicated. We have a research director, King Nguyen, who's amazing at what he does.
Yeah.
And like I said, we are open. So.
And that's, I think one of the things that we forget about is it takes a lot of different people, and you guys have those people that can help, which is kind of awesome. Now, I'm going to ask an off the beaten track question. Yeah. I do not know if there's an answer for this.
Okay.
Has there, in the history that we are aware of, ever been a cancer that has been cured?
So cures depends on how you define the word cure, right?
I know.
If you outlive the diagnosis, you're cured, right? So, but yes, there are curable cancers out there. There are breast cancers. If you catch them early enough, they're curable, right? You get rid of them, 5 years, 10 years, 15 years goes by, they'll never come back, right? They're technically cured. Some cancer doctors define cure as if you reach the 5-year mark, you're technically cured, right? That's the gold standard as we use is a 5-year mark.
Oh, that's good to know.
Yeah, so it just depends on how you define that word cure.
Right.
Can you 100% guarantee, like without a doubt, that this cancer will never come back? It's impossible to do that. I mean, there's always that 0.0001% chance, right? So, but yeah, there are cancers that we have cured, certainly. I think that's how I would look at it. So,
and I think that that's where people get so bogged down is, it seems overwhelming, but we have been making strides into curing,
huge,
extending your life past your original diagnosis.
100%. Look at the number of cancer death rates in America. It has fallen every year for the last 7 years in a row.
Oh, that's awesome.
And it's important to know that we're the only big field in medicine that cancer or death rates as a whole is dropping. Cardiology, it's going up. Lung, COPD is going up.
Yeah.
Kidney disease is going up. Cancer rates, death rates are going down. And it's because of these new treatments, people are living longer, so they're outliving their diagnosis because of these treatments. And that's how you should look at it. So are we curing people? Yeah, I think technically we're curing people. That's how we should look at it. So
no, I agree. And we hear all the bad, even me, like I have every once in a while. Actually, I got a question not too long ago from someone on our Facebook page, which was random, but she basically just said, well, we've been donating all this money. How come there isn't a cure yet? And I was like, well, we've made some major strides. We have really done some pretty amazing things, but we're always going to have something. Unfortunately, our bodies mutate constantly.
Well, look at coronavirus, right? It's mutated 10, 12 times already for what they say, right? So, and that's only been 6 months, right? So.
Right, exactly. So really, I had been thinking a lot about the clinical trial process. And so I'm really, really thankful you took the time just to help set me straight.
Sure.
And I feel, I don't know, I think we may revisit this topic. I think it's going to be a really popular topic amongst our constituents because this is something that applies to us on a daily basis. So we may have to revisit the conversation. I'll probably get 1 million people emailing me saying, hey, you didn't ask this, you didn't ask that. And I'll be like,
100%. No, and you can link us, you can email us, you can go to our website, cccnnevada.com, and just send us a question. We'll be happy to answer them.
Awesome.
That is easy to do, certainly.
That was kind of one of my thoughts is, I'm assuming you possibly have some sort of like health navigators that help people navigate this craziness at Comprehensive.
Yeah, so each one of the physicians has a primary nurse and they function as our navigators. If you actually go on our website, it lists most of our trials that we have available.
Oh, wow. Okay.
So that's huge. So people can actually go on our website and look and say, hey, they have a trial for this or they have a trial for this. All of them aren't listed. It's impossible to list all of them because they change all the time. But the majority of them are listed. It has a huge section just itself on clinical research and what it means and some basic general layman's language, as I call it.
Yeah.
And so people can understand it, of what we offer and how we offer it. And it also has a contact, you type in your information. If you have a question, one of us will get back to you,
Right.
saying, okay, we'd be happy to answer these questions, certainly.
Wow.
So, yeah.
See, this is the other reason why I have these conversations,
Right.
because these are things that I should know that I can pass on. But
Yeah.
there's so much out there that we do have access to, and
Yeah.
it's not as difficult to get in touch with. So I appreciate that. Gosh.
Yeah.
I've kept you a while. I kept you 10 minutes more than I was expecting. So I do
No worries.
apologize for that.
No worries at all. I'm, the goal is to try and spread that we have research in Nevada. You don't have to go outside the state.
Yeah.
Ask your doctor questions. If the doctor doesn't know it, they can certainly look it up. Comprehensive, like I said, CCCN or cccnevada.com is easy to remember. We have a whole research link, and it has a lot of our trial information on there as well.
Mm-hmm.
Certainly there are tons of pages on the internet with trial information, as you know. But just be careful what you read.
Yeah, no, I say pick up the phone. Pick up the phone and talk to a person.
Yeah, and I would just caution patients, just be careful what you read, but advocate for yourself, because knowledge is power, right? Especially in cancer. And the more you know, the better it is. So you should have all the options available. So
yeah, and give your doctor an opportunity to help you get better, right? So talk to your doctor. If you have a concern, you're not feeling they're connecting with you, have a conversation with them, right?
That is why we're here, exactly. So
yeah. Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
I cannot thank you enough, doctor, for spending this time with me and putting up with my crazy questions. And I do totally appreciate your time. And actually, I'm going to put a link also in the comments, so people be able to just quickly find you guys.
That'd be awesome. So
awesome. All right. Well, thank you so much. I'm going to say
thank you for
have
having
a good
me.
day. And we'll be talking to you again. I keep coming back to you.
You're more than welcome. Happy to help. So